They always trusted more than in any other thing. We never trust communism, we never trust anything like that. We trust only God, that's for sure.
Hi, I'm Steve Flatt, and welcome to a special edition of the Amazing Grace Bible class. Some of you may remember last year when Larry Souder and I had a remarkable experience. For 2 weeks, we were privileged to travel through the countries of Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia. We were exploring firsthand the changes in Eastern Europe since the fall of those communist governments over the past several months. We saw some incredible things on our trip. Positively, we saw people excited about new freedoms.
Now the people can go to church free to express their religious thoughts. So from this point of view, it is very well.
We saw the Church of Jesus Christ beginning to assemble and to worship and to work in these countries where belief in God had been discouraged and in some cases even forbidden. And we saw people literally starved for the Word of God. But then we also saw some things that broke our hearts. Before his execution, Ceausescu decreed that every family have at least 5 children. Contraception was forbidden, and government sanctions imposed on those who didn't cooperate. As the economy worsened and the number of children mushroomed, more and more of those children were abandoned. This 3-year-old has AIDS, as do scores of thousands of children across the country, from sharing needles without proper hygienic care. This child went into a coma the day before, and this young boy lies helpless, victimized by a heart defect, and with no prospect for life-saving surgery. When we left the hospital, we took food to an orphanage in the city or town of Boerta. Housed in a residence over 125 years old, there were 74 children, ages 3 to 7, being cared for by 4 ladies. Their living conditions were appalling. The 74 children shared 2 bedrooms. Windows were broken. There were no light bulbs. The children shared 1 bathroom. Cooking was done on a wood stove. The evening we arrived, children were served a glob of cream of wheat, the same meal they had had for breakfast. Most of them suffered from inadequate health care. Many of the children were covered with lice and suffering from scalp conditions. They had infected cuts. They were dirty, and they were starved for affection. We were told that there are some 400 orphanages in Romania, housing at least 10,000 orphans. Our hearts were so touched by these helpless children and their hunger that when Larry and I returned, we talked to the elders of the Madison Church of Christ about some way we could relieve their pain and their suffering. An idea was born that we've called an Adopt an Orphanage plan. When the programs were broadcast last August, an appeal was made to churches across our country to send in relief funds that would be used to support certain orphanages for a 2-year period, allowing the government to get back up on its feet and provide the help that the people need. The response was tremendous. By the end of 1990, over $25,000 was received for this orphanage program, and prospects for several thousand more over the next 2 years were also in place. So we decided to take $15,000 for our first quarterly food drop to select orphanages in the Bucharest area. We chose Bucharest for several reasons. One, it's the most populated city in Romania, population of over 2 million. Secondly, there is a missionary presence there, and we wanted to have hand in hand both the evangelistic and the benevolence thrust. And third, with that missionary presence there could be a continual check on the provisions that were left, thereby securing that they not be sold on the black market.
Our first full day in Europe was spent obtaining and loading 5 large trucks with food and clothing. Hi, I'm Larry Souder. It was a process that began in the daylight hours, but continued well into the night.
And now, 1, 2, 3. Whoa, stop. Over the road, over the road.
It's Monday evening in Vienna, and tomorrow we'll be leaving about 5 a.m. to head toward Hungary and then into Romania and Bulgaria. Today has been spent mostly for organizational purposes. The entire group, numbering about 10 Christians from West Germany, some soldiers who were stationed there, along with Christians from Florida and from Tennessee, Texas, and other places have gathered together. The tons of food have been loaded on the trucks, and also tons of clothing that were brought by the soldiers from West Germany.
We've seen some documentaries on the orphanages, and we know that the plight is very abysmal, and we'd like to we brought with us, I guess, how many tri-walls total?
30.
30 tri-walls total, about 400 pounds of clothing each box.
I guess the biggest thing that really makes me want to be part of this effort is the children. I've always loved children, and when I've heard the needs of these little ones that are in a faraway country with very little sustenance, it just really drove me to be part of the group, and it's just I'm glad to be here.
The second day of our journey was spent traveling from Austria to Budapest, Hungary. Mike Davido, a missionary stationed in Vienna, Austria, and leader of our convoy, has been reaching into Eastern Europe since 1978.
I'm sort of a person that likes a challenge. I like to see certain works accomplished, especially the ones where somebody says, you can do it, you cannot do it. We are presently in Budapest, Hungary. We are about to pick up 5,000 entire Bibles, which were printed for us by this man here. He has his own private company. The price was right, the quality was very good, so we decided to purchase about 15,000 of them. I have been born in communist country and gone through schools down there, but I have never seen or witnessed in my life a nation that has been so deprived and so gutted out about the knowledge of existence of God.
As you watch this video, you'll notice large stickers bearing a blue cross on each of the trucks. There's a fascinating story behind its origin. When Mike Davido was engaged in his first food relief effort into Romania, the border guard asked Mike who he was representing. Mike said, "The Churches of Christ," but the guard said he had never heard of you. Thinking quickly, Mike said, "Well, we represent the Blue Cross." The guard acted like he knew what was going on and said, "Oh, in that case, you can pass on through." When Mike returned to Vienna, he did create the Blue Cross Relief Organization, sponsored by the Churches of Christ.
The coldest day of our trip had to be the morning we passed out Bibles in Sibiu. From there we headed to the countryside and saw what might be called the Leaning Tower of Romania.
Our first food and clothing distribution to an orphanage was in the town of Dumbrovini. A town of about 10,000, Mike Davido had been creating excellent relations with the city officials because of monthly relief drops over the past year. After meeting with the city officials, they suggested that we bring these large amounts of children's clothing. Remember, we have between 5 and 7 tons of children's clothing. They suggested we bring it to this factory where most of the city's workers are employed. These huge boxes, weighing about 400 pounds each, are going to be placed in the central area of the factory. And then the employees will be able to choose whatever they need for the children that are part of their families. Most of our clothing drops were made at orphanages and factory sites where supervisory personnel could see to the distribution of the clothing. But on 2 occasions, we left large boxes where the crowd could take what they wanted. It turned out to be a mistake, because the crowd turned into an angry mob, desperate for the clothing that we were leaving. We're right now in what might be called a daycare center, or that would be the closest American equivalent. And we're bringing some food and a lot of clothes to some of these local daycare centers. These are not orphans in the pure sense of the word, but they are here apparently every day for long periods of time, largely apparently confined in these cribs. I want to show you one child. This is Alexandro. You come here? You come to me? Can I pick you up? Come here. You okay? Okay. This is Alexandro. And I picked him up because he smiled at me. He's got a friendly face. You smile at me? Good-looking boy. They're beautiful children, and it touches your heart to see them in physical need, although these children are apparently better off than many, many thousands of children in the country of Romania.
Here we go.
Right now we're unloading hundreds of Bibles in Dumbavini, and what we're going to be doing with these is mailing them from this location. They'll be mailed to residents in Romania, and by mailing within the country, it saves about 90% on the postage cost. The proprietor of this residence already has the mailing labels and also has the envelopes, and he's going to be packing these Bibles into those envelopes and mailing them to these residents who are enrolled currently in Bible correspondence courses. During our trip, we've stopped at this city, Kopsamica. It's known to the world as the Black City, and it got that nickname because of a huge carbon fiber plant that puts out such extreme pollution that it covers literally everything in the town in a black type of soot. For example, just look at this tree, rubbing a hand against it, and you can see the blackness from the soot that's produced by the plant. The snow, the rooftops, the churches, the mountains, the grass itself is literally black.
There were a number of things that made our journey dangerous and time-consuming. We often traveled at night on roads that were in poor condition and sometimes covered with ice. During most of the trip, we drove through a heavy fog and even saw a man killed in a head-on collision because of the fog. But the morning of the fourth day, we encountered yet another hazard: snow.
After arriving in Bucharest, we took almost 1,000 Bibles to a public high school. In a large assembly hall, the school was allowing adult students to learn the English language using the Bible as a text. Bill McDonough and volunteers in a program called Partners in Progress were teaching some 250 students over a 3-month period.
We have a team that has varied from 20 to 26 here. Most of the people have stayed at least 2 months. We're studying with people who have taken the Bible correspondence course, and we wrote them and invited them to come and study with us. We know that most of them are here because they're primarily interested in English. About 70% of them are professional people. We've baptized 14 thus far, and there are a number of others who are planning to be baptized shortly. This is a great way, we think, to begin the establishment of the church in Romania.
With 6 orphanages in Bucharest, the Minister of Health sent us to the one with greatest need. It was an old building on a poor side of town, housing up to 150 children, newborn to age 5. The director of the orphanage told us that the entire operation, salaries, food, medicine, equipment, building maintenance, utilities, everything, was operated at a cost of less than $50,000 per year. The children were clean, they seemed to be loved, but they were slow in developing motor skills. Some of the 2-year-olds couldn't talk, and some of the 3- and even 4-year-olds had a difficult time walking. Late on Friday afternoon, we went from the orphanage to a boarding school for the hearing impaired. Most of these children were totally deaf, and they came from all over eastern Romania. Of all the places we visited, this one touched my heart the most. 252 children are eating dinner right now, and the average government allotment per child for their meals, and this is for 3 meals a day, is 30 lea per day. That's about 17 or 18 cents per child per day. The children are extremely excited to see us. They had said that others had arrived to take pictures, but we were the only ones who had brought food along with those pictures. How great is the need here? Are the children hungry? Are there adequate supplies as well as food?
Aveți destule provizii alimentare? Sunteți suficient aprovizionați? Unfortunately, no. They haven't got enough food supplies. They haven't got enough room to store the supplies, the food supplies. Well, they buy the food daily and they have a lot of problems.
It's Saturday morning, and since school is shut down, I'm at the dormitory for the boys for the School of the Hearing Impaired. And I've made a lot of new friends. These are some of the sweetest, dearest, most content children in the world. Despite the fact that most of them are deaf, all of them at least partially deaf. They live in dormitories from all over eastern Romania, away from their home, but they're happy, and they love each other, and they're very friendly to new strangers. Love you guys. I love you too. I love you too. I love you too. Until just over a year ago, Bibles were prohibited in Romania for over 4 decades. From our experience last June, we knew that there would be a tremendous demand as we tried to pass out Bibles on the street. So for our own safety, we distributed them from the back of one of our larger trucks. Right now we're passing out Bibles in the street in Bucharest, and these are free. You can see how quickly the people want to receive one of these. Most of them, virtually all of them, have never owned a copy. It's beautiful Bibles, hardback, Old Testament, New Testament, well translated from the NIV into the Romanian language. Cost of the Bible is about $3 a piece. We won't stay here long because the mob will swell, so we'll start moving in just a moment. Go to another site several blocks away and begin another distribution.
Mister, please. Mister.
Hey, Gina. Gina. Pick you up. Oh, this is Gina. And this is the 3rd orphanage that we visited on our trip in Romania. We're about 60 kilometers outside of Bucharest, and we're in a little town called Slabosha. This orphanage is relatively small. There are 46 children here, between the ages of 2 and I would say about 5. It's a little difficult to communicate because no one here speaks English or German, and none of us speak Romanian. So we're doing the best we can as we leave them the food and some clothes for these little children. Gina and all the other children in this room are 2 years old. In fact, they're between 2 and 3. They seem to be healthy and they seem to be clean, but they don't speak and seem to be a little slow in developing for a 2-year-old. Their eyes are bright though, and they're very responsive to affection and to love and attention. Hey honey. Hey Gina. Hey Gina.
The last stop on our journey before heading back to Vienna was Sofia, Bulgaria. On Sunday morning, we worshiped with a group of Christians in a building with no heat.
We would like to have as many Bibles as possible, both pocket size or bigger, both in bigger letters or in small letters, because now I think that people are turning, having that spiritual vacuum in themselves, they are turning to the Lord's Scriptures, and you're most welcome with any amount that you'll bring, both in Bulgarian or English.
On Monday, we took food and clothing to an orphanage in Sofia. Like the large orphanage in Bucharest, this facility was designed for the very youngest children, from birth until about age 4. Its physical condition and the level of care seemed to be a bit above what we saw in Romania. Still, we were told that food and basic medical provisions were in short supply.
While visiting the orphanage, Ron Asher was prompted to tell of a decision he made a couple of days earlier in Bucharest.
Hi, my name is Ron Asher. I'm from Zweibrücken Air Base, West Germany. And I've had the privilege and opportunity to be able to collect some clothing in the military communities there to bring to the Romanian orphans. And in the process, one exciting thing has taken place. This kid is really... What are you doing? You stealing the show from me, huh? One of the fun things, or the neat things that has taken place as a result, is the opportunity that my wife and I have been given to adopt one of the Romanian orphans in the city of Bucharest. We came I have to say, give my wife the credit for this, because she's always wanted to adopt an orphan, and I've never really been hot on it. And she encouraged me to study the scriptures to find out what God's priority on orphans were. And it didn't take me very long to be convinced that God had a high priority on orphans. So through much of Kathy's prayer and through a little bit of my study, I've in the last 6 months really had a change of heart for adopting an orphan. And it looks like, after our trip to Bucharest, that we've got a little girl named Victoria Kluji. And Kathy and I will have to come back in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks and finish the process or the paperwork and make sure that everything is all right with the child as far as the HIV and the mental stability and the physical stability as well.
While we were in Sofia, we inquired about any other site that might need food and clothing, and we were referred to a children's hospital, a hospital that specialized in treatment to the poor and the underprivileged. We're in the boiler room of the Children's Hospital in Sofia. This hospital building is over 100 years old, and to look at this boiler, you'd think it's at least that old. You can see the corrosion on some of the main pipes, leaks that are springing everywhere. The doctors who work here tell us they're afraid that it's going to explode. Frankly, I'm scared of the same thing. There are really no kind of regulatory requirements for boilers, building, anything in Bulgaria. And it's frightening to consider the conditions in which these people work. We've gone from top to bottom, and the conditions in the hospital are deplorable. If you can look at just the fuse box or whatever this is beside me, the electric outlets and the electrical wiring is certainly substandard. They have to cook off stoves like the one behind me. 2 years ago, the government would not even have admitted that hospitals like this existed. Now we're able to come in and to tape this and bring it back to you and to show you the tremendous need that exists in hospitals like this all over Bulgaria.
Number one, what I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for responding to the need of in those places like in Romania and Bulgaria. I think that that's what you are doing by collecting the money and supplying the orphans with food and hungry people for God with Bibles is tremendous. I think it is no way to measure this right now, but I think in next years to come we will see a great fruit, and it will be a great joy to stand in front of God one day and He would say that He has watched us when we have responded to the great need in those countries. Thank you.
Hey, take care. Bye. Little more emotion. Great. Jimmy.
As we returned to the United States and reflected on our journey, we deemed it a success. Over 1,000 children were given food and some basic supplies, and hundreds of families in Romania and Bulgaria were given clothing that they desperately needed. In addition to all this, over 5,000 people received a copy of the Bible, a copy of God's Word that they had never had before. And yet at the same time, as we reflected on our trip, we were saddened too, because conditions have improved in those two countries ever so slightly, and there remains a great need for food and medical supplies for children who need somebody. We're still looking for churches under the Adopt an Orphanage program that's sponsored by the Madison Church of Christ to help meet those needs. We had said initially that about $10,000 a year is needed to totally sponsor an average-size orphanage and to give them food and basic relief supplies. Maybe the church where you attend would be able to do that in total, or perhaps you could serve with other churches and give a part of that aid that would allow these children that needed help over the next 2 years. If after seeing what you've seen on this program, you have an interest in helping these little ones through this Adopt an Orphanage program, won't you please inquire further? I would ask you to write to the Amazing Grace Bible Class, P.O. Box 419, Madison, Tennessee, 37116. The address again, the Amazing Grace Bible Class, P.O. Box 419, Madison, Tennessee, 37116. These little children have nobody, and they desperately need somebody. Won't you be that somebody? Won't you help? We look forward to hearing from you.
Mister, please.